is to tell you a few things and then have a little at the end where you to creative and create some transportation policy for the world, maybe mostly for the U.S. We have to make those kinds of decisions. What kind of a world do we want to have? Ultimately, do we want to? I think I'll do. Give you a brief about rising oil prices, about recent trends in public action and what's happening. Probably a conclusion when it comes about recent trends. High oil prices, people driving cars and more people driving transport. But in any go to public transport and then what kind of options do we have in the future? I'll make kind of a case for additional investment in public transport. I'm not going to prejudice the case by necessarily not being the only way to do it. That's where you guys come in and get off and maybe come up with some maybe different models of what sort of a transportation policy we might have. The title initially was Public An Era of Prices. And the more I thought about it, the more I had to change the title and make it a bigger title. So here's the transportation of prices, so transportation policy, but transportation policy in rise in climate change, obesity, and levels. Find anytime you touch on these areas, you can't avoid on many of these areas because they all. Right? Whether you or drive more, that's health, exercise, fitness, etc. All those kinds of things that are part of it. So, in a sense, I'm going to be hoping for some form of a comprehensive transportation policy that allows people to take all the other things, carbon that's being spewed into the atmosphere, for example. So, whatever transportation policy we have, we got to have. Want to be that carbon intensive. So lots of things are going to have to be. We know now that since about the middle of the 20th century, the U.S. has come primarily on cars to get us around. The interstate highway system, for example, slides through all kinds of neighborhoods. So we still have neighborhoods, cities that every once in a while, the Rondo neighborhood, for example, that Southern has parades and so on, and fundamentally a loss. The highways zip right through, and the folks now are sort of celebrating what might have, but certainly a lot. So we would be the way to move around. So oil became the key source of energy that kept the transportation sector of the economy moving. Still is. This is and gas affect our income, but also what we drive. And so again, those things are interrelated. The kind of products we have depend on the choices we made at certain points in our history. Cheap oil and individual cars to live have actually encouraged sprawl. There are some videos that we have vibrate talk about sprawl and oil and the effect it has on that. So you have one thought that oil is so expensive we can't drive, can't use it to power our cars. What all those suburbs, those far-flung suburbs that have been gaining population throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s. Big cities have low population regularly, even though some metropolitan are bigger. It's not the cities that are getting bigger; it's the donut around the city really that's getting bigger. All the various. So cheap oil has allowed. And that the donut wait at some point, or does it that, in a sense, those suburbs now become little islands that are going to have their own agricultural systems or their own stores and that sort of thing. So that's to consider as we talk about policy and how oil affects the development of our cities. Driving more and watching more TV and using all sorts of electronic things have made us fatter and increased morbidity or sickness. And there's association, a journal on obesity, an association on obesity, and it's just a massive problem. It's increasing in this country, and it increases in countries, well, in the U.S. certainly, China, and other places, with the exception of certain Pacific that have gotten really morbidly obese as a result of the foods that they import and a more style. Pollution from car also has increased mortality, death, as well as illness. That's another thing that pollution. And finally, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's an organization made up of thousands that have looked at climate change and whether it's happening. So they're happening, and they're probably that humans have been an agent to happen has steadily increased, so that now Jim Hansen, the chief meteorological, that it's for him 10% that it's negated or human significant role in. So that gets us into this this whole issue of what sort of mobility, what sort of a vehicle are we going to encourage mobility? How do what proper as usual isn't an option. We're at this crossroads to change the way we move, keep ourselves in places and the places of work. Those are to change, and some of these changes are away. I've taught the cities. People are trickling to the central cities to go to or to buy up condominiums and apartment houses in cities. So that hole that developed over the last several decades gradually start to increase in and people close urban America don't want to be commute. So what's the problem? The problem is we don't have choice. We have walking. Those are good all. Not if you have cars, and you've probably read newspaper articles about bicyclists who have been buses or hit by so on. And those kinds of stories aren't necessarily really for those kinds of options. So we may have to know what other countries have done. When you were on a Sweden trip, you noticed how Sweden had lots of bike dedicated lanes for alternative transportation that we will see pushed in coming days. Rising oil prices. Let's take a look at that real fast. A decade ago, oil was nearly $10. In the last 9 years, real oil prices have quadrupled. In 2007, people asked if we could actually cope with $60 per barrel oil. Oh, God, we'd love to cope with $60 per barrel. Now, slightly more expensive. Since an oil price, certainly, and it's even though in the summer it's been trending down somewhat. Interesting, because these things are cycles, but they're trending down somewhat. Nevertheless, in recent oil on Monday, for example, prices the barrel spiked $5 and went up about $30, and then it started to go down again, and then it went up a little bit. So the recent oil price is about $107 per barrel and subject to greater fluctuation. You may wonder what could have happened in the last 2 days that might have caused the oil price to spike. Any thoughts? Any possibility? What's that? Some of the exactly blowing through refineries in the Gulf of Mexico and on land in Texas and Louisiana. So some of the refining capacity, a little bit, to cause people to realize that gasoline prices were places you can't get gas because the way the gasoline is distributed once it's refined, some places get a lot of it, and some places it takes a more circuitous route. Okay, so that's one factor. Yeah, that wonderful. Okay, $1 billion. What's the package? 700 and possibly a trillion. Billion here and there. Pretty soon, you're up to a trillion. So that's a real package. What's the value of the dollar? Yeah, people are going to worry about it, right? And consequently, since it is priced in dollar terms, that's a difficulty. And so, consequently, people are anticipating inflation possibly. Consequently, higher oil prices may do this. So, combination of being limited and the fact that the U.S. economy is. Gasoline prices have also, over time, since 2000, real gasoline prices have risen dramatically compared to, so that today, anyone know the price of gasoline? A gallon of gasoline? $3.45. Yeah. Yes, it is. Did you look it up? And a good place to look up. All, by the way, is a good. It's Energy Information Administration. EA is part of Old McDonald Farm. IA. No, that's a way to remember it. Anyway, DOE.gov. So check that out. In the little box in the upper right-hand corner, they have the national gasoline averages. So you can check there to see just how badly the economy is, or what consequences oil prices might have. In March real price surpassed the peak that in 1981 in real terms, inflation adjusted terms, the price of gasoline was at its height, and it started to dribble down again, and then spiked. So just recently in March, it surpassed that level, and it's continuing to go up. So gasoline is one of those things that's uncertain. I think consumers now are beginning to, gee, maybe it's real. Maybe this is real. Maybe it's long term, and consequently, their behavior is starting to change. So, friends, well, Americans drove 11 miles less than last March, and roughly about 9.5 billion miles less in May than last May. This latest one is a 4% drop, the one the March, and it's the steepest year reduction since 1942. Country on the go with cars for quite a while, and now we're seeing that finally back to when they their choices. Before we assumed we economists consumers have essentially a very inelastic for gasoline. Price elasticity of demand is very, very low. And all that means is that it doesn't matter where the price goes, you go ahead, because there were no options, no substitute. And now not driving, using some other conveyance, some other means, is a little more real. So we're finding that the price elasticity of demand for gasoline in the short run has gone up just a weeny little bit, 0.16. Not exactly a massive increase. So it's low to begin with. It's still pretty low because we don't have any real substitutes. The Europeans do. They want to go with public transport, so their price elasticity of demand is a little bit higher. It's more. Okay. I'm not sure just how much I want to go through this because I want to give you a chance to. I'll just briefly go through this a little bit more. In general, U.S. riders in 2007 took 10.3 billion trips on transit systems, which marked the highest level in 50 years, since before the Eisenhower Interstate Highway System, and since many streetcars in America. So that was a substantial upwards. Usage this year is up 0.3% nationally over last year's highs, and the largest gains have come from predominantly automobile-oriented places like Denver, Dallas, Charlotte, where commutes are troublesome, costly, and people have shifted over. In Minneapolis, St. Paul, same deal. Bus companies have very high, very steep increases in ridership. Light rail deal up to capacity. So their were quite conservative compared to what happened. What actually happened was that people stormed. So apparently, this is something that's a substitute for people and not their cars in the face of prices. So there is some ability in their behavior. Well, let me just say that let's also bring climate change into this, because that's also a factor. The transportation sector, including, is responsible for roughly a third of the nation's energy use and carbon emissions. So roughly about the carbon emissions are the result of the transportation sector, and this includes cars. And the Department of Energy shows that per passenger mile, on a per passenger mile basis, rail is substantially than energy hungry than an automobile. Something that people are starting as well. That maybe of a shift is a reasonable shift. Just to idea of one source that is available. Stephen Goddard wrote a book called "Getting There," and it's a little bit of a conspiracy theory book, except for the fact that there's no theory to it. There was, in fact, a conspiracy, and we have memos. GM really did want to bankrupt the trolley systems, electric-based transport systems in various cities, and replace them with GM buses. And they did it, and it was quite a successful transition. But it was fascinating that there were many functioning systems that were systematically starved of funds and forced to go into bankruptcy ultimately. So we had, even Los Angeles had a transportation systems, a trolley system that was quite successful. And well, in any case, there's also a video on this if you're interested in checking it out. Have another pizza and watch that video. The shift from cars recently, since we are using fewer car miles, shifted emissions by 9 million metric tons in the first 3 months of 2008. So 2008. So you do get less CO2 equivalent gases going into the atmosphere as a result of this. Bicycle and motorcycle sales have increased rapidly. I don't know if you've seen any reports about this, but hey, it's simple economics. That's the bike company right there saying, we've had a banner year. The Giant Manufacturing Company, which is the world's largest bicycle manufacturing company in Taiwan, reports a banner year in 2008 and expects to do even better in 2009. Other bicycle companies have done just as well. Motorcycle sales have zoomed through the roof. Scooter sales are in, since that's suddenly become a popular form of conveyance. And I've seen more people in Cloud. My own anecdotal, but let's put it this way: avoided killing a few people in St. Cloud. So those folks are out there and are engaged in using different kinds of conveyances. And this is entirely anecdotal. The number of people who self-report that they're walking more, or even using walking as an alternative to get to in urban areas, that's also increased. Obesity rates continue to rise. The Center for Disease Control cites, but a relatively slow pace. So it's inexorable. States in general are turning on average more and more obese, but at a very low rate, at a rate that's essentially statistically insignificant. But nevertheless, it's a slight increase. More housing developments with smaller yards and walkable distances in stores, schools, and recreation. This is all part of the development towards a less oil-intensive sort of housing development pattern. New urbanism is the name for it, and in fact, I think Professor Lindstrom lives in just such a type of development near Sartell. Basically, it means amenities, public amenities are sort of common goods for the group, and the housing is compact, small yards, proximities, walking distance to either recreational fields or stores or something of that sort. Kind of like a small town in the 1950s. That's what the new urbanism is all about. It just basically means you can bike to places, you can walk to places, and things aren't as complicated as having to drive a long distance for that. And then people are starting to trickle back into city centers, as I mentioned before. So, public transportation policy. According to the American Public Transportation Association, American transit use reached its all-time high in 1946, when a population less than half the current size took over 23 billion trips. So we still have some ways to go before we meet the 1946 levels. That's still at the highest level. In the post-war years, riders forgot about transportation systems. It wasn't as much fun. Driving your own car was a lot more enjoyable. I suppose you could have better dates that way, lover's lane, etc. Going in a bus just didn't do the trick. In any case, in post-war years, riders abandoned transportation systems and people moved to cars and the highway boom that came along with it and suburbs and everything else. Massive migration to sprawling suburbs drove ridership downward to a low in 1972 of just 6.5 billion trips. So we're just a little bit higher than that low in 1972 at this point, but increasing. That's the trend line. And services, I think, ultimately have to get better, and the ease of getting to different places has to increase before people really shift in a real significant way to mass transit. Where do we go from here? Well, right now, not too many people use public transport. Just under 5% of commuters took public transit to work in 2005. Not a shockingly massive number. So that is an interesting number that may increase substantially, and we think it probably will. According to all the Energy Information Administration's information about gasoline prices for the future, that seems to be in the car. And if that price elasticity demand then and if the options become more available, you'll have more moving to transport. Companies are getting involved in providing more commuter opportunities. Those who don't come into a car, for example, don't come with a car or come with a commuter group are now getting advantages. I know even my son-in-law in Denver gets his transportation costs on public transport paid entirely by the corporation. And if he rode a bike or if he didn't use public transport, they'd figure out another incentive to give him. Maybe a place to store his bike, his own shower, who knows, other things. But they're very much pro offering more of those kinds of incentives. Parking places are considered to be a free good by most individuals, but they're not. They're a relatively scarce resource, and they cost. There's a marginal cost associated with them. So I think in your near future, you can expect to pay higher fees for parking, and more corporations, instead of having free parking lots, are now going to charge for parking and offer, let's say, a disincentive to come in with a car. Well, let's see. I'll just zip through some of the stuff a little bit. Some of the points that I was making, and I can give you the actual numbers if you want them, is that it won't take too much to shift to public transport, that we can actually take the budget that we now use for roads and highways and take a chunk out of that and get a whole lot more public transport money spent. Annual federal spending on new transit projects is just $1.6 billion compared to $700 billion, nothing. 4%, and this is 4% of the nearly $37 billion allocated to highways. So here's an interesting choice we can make in transportation policy. Do we switch away from $37 billion to highways and maybe offer more than $1.6 billion to public transport, to transit that makes commuting a little bit more easy and reduces the greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere, or at least the city-based greenhouse gases. Anything that's electrified, you have to recognize, gets its power from a power company where it also pumps carbon into the atmosphere, but at least it can be done in a central place and controlled better than coming out of a gas pipe. We can expect to add about 150 more million people to our population over the next 50 years, and that's going to put more pressure on our transportation system. So we have to decide more roads, more cars, or some other way to move people around. Let's see. I'll just keep going here and talk a little bit about why there doesn't seem to be much progress in this discussion on transportation policy. I'm just really heartened that there's a group of people here that came to a talk on transportation because this is usually something that doesn't happen in the country. Transportation isn't talked about quite often. It's usually a dull, boring subject because it's done in some committee someplace, and it's not as sexy as the latest bombs or something of that sort. But here's some reasons that quite a few articles have given for why this isn't a sexy topic. The perception. Dirty, smelly, tunnels, all those kinds of images pop up when you think of subways, bad air, etc. And the idea of imagining a more sustainable future with solar panels and sunshine and electric cars, that seems, with butterflies maybe close by, that seems a whole lot nicer than some dark tunnel where a big subway car goes through, or a subway train goes through. So the humble subway car rumbling through a dark, century-old track underneath Manhattan doesn't get as much play. It's just simply taken for granted. Here's another rationale why it doesn't get a lot of play, because the urbanites get the benefit. So Minneapolis-St. Paul has what percentage of the population in Minnesota, roughly? Guess.
The whole metro area?
Yeah. 50%? Actually more than that. A little bit more than 50%, but yeah, roughly half the population is down there. And all the transportation bills usually involve huge political fights. And what do you think the issues are? Where's the money going? If we allocate money to transportation, especially mass transit, who's going to get the share of it? We tax those folks in outstate Minnesota, but it's those damn urbanites who are getting the actual rails laid and the transit investments. So monies that seem to congregate in one area, even though the tax base is beyond that area, that's the source of contention. So a lot of outstate legislators always save this card and say, what are you going to give me? If I give you transportation, what are you going to give me out here? Are you going to pave my road, fill my pothole? Those are the kind of trade-offs that these folks do. So it's not an easy thing to get accomplished. There are no transit champions. When there are a few sort of natural folks who sort of belong to this issue, or at least have credibility in this issue, but they're a lot more interested in bashing Bush's energy policy or going after those kinds of national issues. You don't get up and argue strenuously in favor of more light rail transit. It just doesn't play as well on the news. So as Rahm Emanuel, a Democrat from Illinois, says, he represents Chicago but doesn't show much leadership on this. This is another fellow who talked about Rahm Emanuel, rather. A lot of politicians from smaller cities or suburbs must be looking at guys like that and saying, if they don't want to take this on, then I really better stay away. So it kind of chills conversations about transportation in those dark corner discussions that are had in the halls of legislatures. The transit conversation in general is marginalized because if it's not talked about politically, then political observers won't talk about it. and if political observers don't talk about it, then no one thinks it's important. So the whole thing is kind of a downward spiral, and it doesn't get the kind of attention it needs. But with climate change, this has gotten far more interest now. And as a result, for example, in a report from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government published in March, just recently, by economists Ed Glazer and Matthew Kahn, they note that even where transit use is highest, emissions from public transport are a small fraction of per household emissions from private driving. For example, in Chicago and Washington, per household emissions from private cars are more than 10 times the emissions from public transport. And that makes a difference in a big city. Reduces pollution and makes for a much nicer place to be. In a new study from the Brookings Institution, it argues that federal transport decisions have historically limited the viability of transit and transit-oriented development, which represents an important tool for shrinking carbon footprints by reducing vehicle travel and associated fuel use. So when you're thinking the way Portland, for example, or even Seattle, the way they try to, Portland mostly, the way they try to vector growth, kind of push it into certain alleyways, and try to make sure that there's good infill and good higher density development, you get some real consequences with respect to pollution reduction. And just the number of miles driven reduces. Not only that, but housing gets closer, more compactly packed around transportation alleys. Well, where you don't, you get housing everywhere. And then it's hard to come in after the fact and say, let's see, where do I put that track? You start to wheedle it around, and pretty soon it's a little harder to run policy that way. Much easier to create whatever pattern you're going to do and then make sure that development takes place there. That also gives you more green space, because then you can give people more green areas in a more intentional way. Well, biggest obstacle, of course, you probably know, to getting public transport more investment and more attention is just simply economics, the price of oil. But I think that's starting to self-correct, and we're seeing now more of an inclination to look in different directions. So with $4 gasoline, it's roughly $3.45 here now, but $3.71 nationally, and no real inclination to think that this is going to go much lower in future days, unless, of course, we have something else that's really pleasant to think about, a global depression, or even a local recession. When oil use goes down, that'll bring prices down as well. But that's not a very happy consequence. Peak oil is another term you may have heard about. Anyone know what peak oil is? It has nothing about looking through a keyhole and seeing a puddle of oil. Peaking.
We've reached, like, the amount of oil is like
50% gone.
Yeah.
That's what peak oil. You essentially reach this. The Hubbard curve is essentially kind of like one of those standard distribution curves, a big hump, and you're pretty much at the top, and you're on the way down. And the problem with that is that as you go on the way down, the rest of your economy keeps wanting to go up. And so there's this wedge that keeps getting wider and wider and wider, and that wedge has to be filled with energy conservation, new technologies, and whatever else that can fill the energy needs that people have. So people have said that in fact, it's pretty clear that we've reached peak oil in the United States. We're way past 50% of our oil production in the United States, and we're just sort of on that downward part in the U.S. But in the world, we're not quite sure. We don't know, for example, how much oil Saudi Arabia really has. There are estimates, but they're being very cagey about how much they have. And various other countries that are oil giants also aren't saying exactly how much oil they have. But many folks, including folks from inside those countries, have estimated that it's getting close. So peak oil could either be here now, what some people call effective peak oil. The more uncertainty, wars, disruption you have, the more that pushes up the uncertainty of getting oil at a reasonable price. That risk premium keeps going up, pushing oil prices up, so that you have effectively reached peak oil. Or you can reach actual peak oil, which may be around maybe in a year, maybe 2, maybe 5, depending on what those proven reserves actually show us. So that's there. And even in a slow-moving economy, if you're on that downward curve, you're not going to do too well. And all our oil reserves that we're finding now, the latest sizable findings, the ones off the coast of Brazil, for example, and the ones that we found in the United States, Alaska, Anwar, all those are just little puddles. And the demand for oil is such that no matter when those puddles get drilled, they won't supply enough to really make a difference in bringing oil prices down. Maybe by a few cents either way. That's about the influence that those kinds of sources have. So that leaves us with a kind of a problem. We've got climate change. We have obesity and health issues. We have neighborhoods and how do we construct our houses and such. What else? Well, yeah, oil prices and all that kind of stuff, and transportation. How do we put it all together? That's what I'd like you to think about a little bit at this point. I don't know if you've got maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Talk to your neighbor and try to figure out what you think future policy ought to be, and then maybe we can talk about it as a group. Introduce yourselves first, of course. Good idea. As a group as well, do we have some thoughts or ideas about, or even questions about transportation policy as we move along? Anyone come up with something that, in a sense, think of it as a portfolio of transportation options, right? You open up your file and there are all these little sections in there. Some of it can be public transport, public transit. Some of it can be cars. Some of it can be something else, buses, etc., various private buses, whatever. But you basically have a fan of all kinds of opportunities to move people around. And your question is to yourself, how do we get these people moving around to different places, because that's what they like, and they want to go to different jobs. They might want to visit Aunt Matilda across the way and all that sort of thing. How do we get them to those places? What should the portfolio look like 10 years from now or 15 years from now, since you're going to be living in that era? What do you think? Yeah. Go ahead. You look like you have an answer. That's an economic tool that people, that governments are using to try to reduce the amount of congestion, because certainly if cars are going to figure heavily into your transportation portfolio, you still haven't gotten rid of, even if those cars are the greenest possible cars, you're not going to get rid of congestion, because there are just going to be lots of people at certain times of the day on that, in that lane. So congestion pricing is a way to tax people who contribute to a negative externality, and that is congestion. At certain times of the day, they help slow everything down. So the way to do it is to figure out how can I restrict those people from this highway in such a way that the highway stays smooth and continuous. And one way is to price access during peak times at higher rates, and during non-peak times maybe zero price or something less. Stockholm, and on a Sweden trip, was one of those places that had congestion pricing. It's done electronically, so it's pretty easy. You get a bill at the end, realizing, boy, maybe those trips to downtown aren't such a good idea when that price comes in. London and various other cities. So congestion pricing, you would say, maybe might be one of those options for cities trying to get rid of.
I definitely think it's a
Yeah.
to travel the United States versus the European nations, for example. But in London, for example, has increased use of public transportation and
Yeah.
reduced carbon emissions as well. So
Yeah.
it's been effective not only in reducing the amount of congestion.
It was interesting for me to meet with people in places like Sweden, and then on a previous trip to in Norway, where I met with officials who told me just point blank, this is from someone who came from the United States that's used to cars being the king, saying point blank, no, we're trying not to encourage cars. We're trying to discourage cars. We want to make car driving unpleasant. In our policy. That's their transportation policy. So any way to make cars less pleasant, and maybe something that you do infrequently. You go into town on occasion with your car, but not as a regular pattern. And so they were thinking up all sorts of interesting ways to keep traffic nice and loose and keep it flowing. 78 to $82 billion is what congestion costs are estimated to be in the United States. What does that mean? It means that there are other things you could have been doing with your time, and the valuation of those other things you could have been doing your time instead of doing this in the middle of a traffic jam, that is roughly estimated to be about 78 to 82 billion bucks. So it's a sizable amount, and it's something that we should take into account. It's not a freebie, it's a real cost, and that maybe congestion costs would be a policy, would be part of our...
Not just taxing everyone, it's the people that are actually contributing to it that are paying for it.
That's true. What if it's a lowly paid nurse or teacher who has to be at a hospital or a school and who can't really afford these high congestion costs?
I know they have exceptions as far as those who are employed within a certain area, so they have a pass, for example.
What if
Right.
like buses exempt, and then you encourage like another instead that you ride a bus or you carpool, like
Right.
carpool lane in a lot of cities, so maybe
Yeah.
just add alternatives on that too.
Right. Lo and behold, on the outskirts of these zones, there are now parking places being developed where people park their cars and then take the bus into the... so, it's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
I lived on the East Coast last year. I lived in D.C. for a while, and they had that, but the metro is easily accessible.
Yeah.
But the biggest problem is they have they have toll booths on all their turnpikes. In Massachusetts, in the summer, going back from like Cape Cod, Connecticut, you'd be backed up for miles and miles and miles because of these toll booths, because they're just a cluster. It's like everyone in these few lanes has to spread out for about 600 yards and then get back in the two lanes again. And as soon as when you veered off to Connecticut, the Mass Turnpike was empty. So all the congestion caused by this congestion pricing and the cost of it made it even worse. And it probably cost us an extra hour.
And there's definite noticeable difference between an electronic or manual system, because that's the standard stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, money has to be gotten out of this so that you buy, I think in some places you have an electronic chip, and then you just fill the chip and it automatically withdraws something from you each time you pass it. Yeah, that's true. Some other ideas about this vision of the future.
I think diversity would be a very big key. You see right now, biking to work, it's appealing to the population that's growing, but it's definitely not appealing to some people.
Yeah.
But when you take
In Minnesota.
genuine
Boy.
Minnesota, it's tough to get on your bike. But there is, especially where the climate is better, there'd be a population that's going to do all the time. There's a population, maybe they want to cling to their cars for a while. But the reality is that apart from, we have one rail system, Minneapolis, and then and no other, there's a busing system, but that's kind of frowned upon by most people who own
Yeah.
cars. So I think we have to get away from the idea, like you were saying, the car is king. So present other options with that, but make those options available by highlighting the savings. I think we get right now the disadvantages, the climate change and stuff like that. We're at a unique stage where that's really coming to head. Like I think we've all noticed, like when we were little kids, we never heard anything about this, or even in youth. Now it's really starting to be, so we have this danger, this ominous cloud, oh, what's going to happen, But also we need to see the economic advantages, because there are advantages, as we mentioned, the oil being so pricey right now. It's going to save a lot of money if you can just initially invest in these new things, and we'll reap the benefits later. But I don't think we get too much of that right now. And so some of the places, I don't know about transportation yet. No idea. I should know more about it. But I think we just need more information. We need to get information, get the people informed. Right now we have fear in people's minds, but if we can give options and present them diversity options, biking, trains, new ideas of transportation that haven't been around for a while. I'm sure people give them incentives. I don't know if the government, I assume that under the current administration there are too many benefits for scientists, looking at do some more, but like we said, incentives are the key, and I think we have to present those in a better way.
Yeah, at least have a discussion and have somebody write about them, rather than keeping it under wraps someplace. How about this as an option? Keeping prices of oil at a high level, or let's say put a tax on a variable tax on gasoline, so that it stays at $4 and higher on into the future. Never is allowed to drop below that. What do you think about that?
I think the people that we heard of those who can't afford it but need to get to work so they can at least keep their house.
Okay.
Their food or their heating bills. I mean, I've been able to cope with it, and I'm sure most of us have been. But it's hard for the people who really need to get to their job and have no other way of getting there besides their car.
That's what's so great about it, is that it hits you in the face. So maybe you can't live that far from your job anymore. Maybe you have to live in that local community.
Maybe you can't afford to live there.
Yeah.
What if you're a farmer and you have to live outside of town and commute into town to sell what you have? There are not options for everybody. If you set that bar too high, some people are going to have lots of issues with it financially.
Yeah, that's one of the first arguments that are going to come up. Hey, this is a really regressive sort of tax that seems to hit the poor in a very significant way, or those who can least afford it. So, if we try something like this as a way to make sure that GM and Toyota and all those others keep their eye on the ball and keep coming up with either more efficient cars or engines in general that are more efficient, then we have to make sure that it's part of an integrated package that also takes into account those kinds of concerns. Maybe there's a credit for gasoline for individuals who really need it. The way we make exceptions for various income categories. We can do that here, means tested in a sense.
Do you think that could ever realistically be enacted as a policy?
That's a real good question. We're kind of tax phobic in this country, and we're, except of course when we're spending $700 billion to bail somebody out that may get the rest of us and pull the rest of us under. But in general, we don't want to raise taxes for a lot of things, even though we know that we pay taxes for a lot of things that we like, education and such.
As a part of the Democratic debating process this last year, wasn't it that Hillary Clinton was sort of proposing a tax break?
Yes.
For gasoline for the summer, and Barack Obama.
And John McCain, both McCain and Hillary, right. And Obama said this was pandering, and it was. It's crappy policy. Keep in mind that the National Highway Trust Fund, which is the fund that is paid into by all your gasoline taxes, it repairs or it helps repair the roads. And because people drove less, March, April, May, even now, people are driving less taxes went into that fund, and it's created a deficit, roughly an $8 billion deficit that someone is going to have to make up. Us. We either make it up with roads. So with that, if we took those taxes off, to do what Hillary and McCain were suggesting, we'd be in an even deeper hole. And so we couldn't repair our roads. So someone's going to have to somehow take these dots and sort of connect them and say, see how this relates to that one? You got to kind of see them as joint and maybe figure out that this pool of money, either get the pool of money from somewhere else, but this pool of money is worthwhile for us. We have to somehow get the money to repair the roads or have fewer roads to repair. That could be another part of your transportation policy. How many roads do we really need? And do we really need to keep up as prime, well-surfaced roads, especially in outstate Minnesota? I've been on some wonderful roads. Nowhere. The roads to nowhere. There are lots of them up there. And so you wonder, in those areas that are depopulating on a regular basis, at some point there are going to be roads without towns. Maybe some of those we can sort of let go and let the squirrels and whoever else kind of mess around with them and just not fix them up after a while. So that might be part of an intentional way of reducing our dependence on particular vehicles or vehicular traffic, maybe some other way of dealing with it. Electric cars, we've got the GM Volt ready to roll out, and if you're thinking of cars as part of your portfolio, it's supposedly coming out in 2010, maybe if they figure it out. But that's about 400 miles of range with an additional full tank of gas. The little motor really won't do much except run the generator, which gives you a little more electricity to run that electric car. But Chrysler supposedly is coming out with a whole line of electric vehicles. They're going to start with a plug-in hybrid and then expand. A plug-in hybrid just simply means that you can plug up the battery, and if you don't go more than 20, 30 miles a day, you're an electric vehicle. You don't ever have to touch your gasoline in your small motor. And the Tesla Model S is a $60,000 version. They have a Tesla, another model, that's about $100,000. It's a sports car. Yeah, it's kind of a Ferrari. It's a little out of my budget, out of my class. But nevertheless, there are cars now coming out so that at least one has that kind of an option. And as my engineering friend reminded me, find out how much electricity is going into it and where that electricity was generated with what fuel. Because you may just be using coal, which is domestic, so you are at least providing a little bit of distance from our foreign suppliers. We get roughly 58 to 60% of our oil from abroad, so we are dependent in that sense. But nevertheless, it's still pumping out carbon into the atmosphere. So, and apparently the latest Toyota Prius will have in its roof some embedded solar cells, which is really cool, because that'll take care of some of the load that air conditioning and lights and other things have on the car. So that'll also extend its range, and we'll see eventually cars made up entirely of solar cells that will be able to collect energy while they're sitting somewhere. That's kind of neat.
Do you know anything about those hydrogen-powered buses they have in some cities in California? Are those working out well?
Beta testing, and they are working out just fine in those places, yeah. The ones that I would like to know about are the ones that are being tested in more inclement areas. In Canada, for example, how's the winter treating them, and are they worthwhile? We see a lot of buses that are natural gas powered, some electric buses, but I know in Sweden there were lots of biofuel and natural gas powered buses. So the natural gas pumps less carbon into the atmosphere. So those are options of kind of fixing up the car fleet that we have. Another policy might be to have the turnover in the car fleet be faster. Right now, for example, the light truck and SUV category of vehicles, those are tanking. The sales figures for those things are going right on down, along with the the percentage of the auto market that Detroit represents. So they're like dying month to month. The hybrid SUVs are helping them keep up some of their profits, but what do we do about replacing those kinds of cars with what sort of vehicles? And GM is scrambling, and maybe its Volt will bring it back up. But there's another area or another type of vehicle that will eventually need to be replaced or changed. And even a hybrid big SUV, it uses an awful lot of other resources. So connected to climate change and resource conservation in general, it may not be the best type of vehicle. Let's see, another option, personal rapid transit, PRT, is something, I don't know if any of you have heard of that. Yeah, tell me, do you recall what it might be?
I think exactly small pods.
Yeah. Basically, it's just a series of ribbons in a campus or in a city, and you have these little pods. It's sort of if you believe in sort of individualized transportation, this is your public transport. What you do is you go to a little waiting area, punch in your code, and then zipping along quickly comes this little pod, and you get into the pod with maybe another 2 or 3 other people, or just yourself, and that pod then goes. And so there are a constant stream of pods onto the whole system, and this is it's kind of almost like a Disneyland ride in a lot of ways. So that's a possibility that we may see that in certain parts of cities. And it'd be nice. It's sort of like I suppose if we have already a Skyway system for Minneapolis-St. Paul, this would be another version of that Skyway system, protected pods going around. Electrifying rail. Right now we have rail run by diesel trains. What if we turned our rail systems to electric, and we wouldn't have to use imported oil? We could use our own coal. It still would be a fossil fuel, giving us that electricity, but there's an option. Trolley-like cars or buses on highways. You'd have to electrify an awful lot of roadway to make things work in this country. Maybe the more dense areas, Southern California, for example, the East Coast, maybe those areas would be rapid bullet trains or those TGV alternatives that you see in France. Real fast trains that can go up to 300 miles an hour. Those are cool to be in. Fast and electrified, and be a good way to get us away from air travel, which may be part of the portfolio that is going to get smaller. I think maybe we have to sort of count on the fact that you might not be able to, or future students, that is to say maybe a few groups after you, might not be able to go on spring break flying somewhere. The cost of that may be prohibitive given where jet fuel might be. And maybe even for greenhouse gas reasons, we'd have to reduce the use of that. You might get 2 tickets when you're born. You got 2 trips, kid. Here it is. You can either sell them to others in the secondary market in an auction, or you can go ahead and use them, but use them wisely. This is all you got. And that's something that German legislators have been talking about, that people ought to maybe receive certain limited travel opportunities, because greenhouse gases, part of the climate change problem. So you're moving into a whole different world that I don't know about, but it's going to offer different mobility options, and in some cases, maybe not so pleasant, especially the not being able to fly places quickly. But if you have a 400 miles an hour, that may be a bad replacement for a jet. Have we had enough? All right, let's all get in our cars. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.